Welcome back to the Be All In podcast. We are sitting today in a slightly different location than our usual gym spot because we have some athletes preparing for our internal comp on Saturday. So we've given them the gym and we are hiding in a secret location for those watching online. For those listening, it should sound crisp audio quality. We've got Bailey and I here today, and we have a fun topic for discussion. It's quite a recent topic, but we're out the other side of it, so we decided we can now reflect back. Bailey, do you want to introduce what we're talking about?
Bailey lost his license, and we're going to speak about why losing my license, how it turned into more of a positive than a negative.
Okay. Are we happy to kick right into it?
Yeah, straight
Let's
in.
roll.
Let's rip the Band-Aid
We're going
off.
to sort of reflect on the story behind it. We have some funny anecdotes of some of the negatives, but there definitely have been some major learnings from this, apart from that Bailey might need to slow down in his driving.
No, that is probably the only lesson I haven't learned in terms of how to drive, but there's other areas around it which I feel like have transformed the way I look at a few things.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with the fun stuff, how it happened. So as the passenger princess, I can acknowledge that poor Bailey does have to drive everywhere in our relationship.
I don't complain about it, but I drive.
He does a great job.
We probably, as human beings, we probably all get pulled over maybe like 5% of the time driving. But if I'm driving 100% more than Maddie is, of course I'm going to get pulled over more. Anyway.
So he tallied a few points, and a lot of them in his defense were when we would go travel and hire
higher
a car.
cars.
So
one
we
in
didn't know
Cairns,
the
one in
locations.
Noosa. Yeah, I'm going like 5 or 10 kilometers over in a foreign city, which I haven't been to before, in a hire car, which I'm getting used to how fast to drive. Pretty unlucky. I'm not just like a daredevil.
And when those happened, like we didn't, like, again, they just happened. We're like, oh no, didn't matter. And then he got done on the way to work once at 4 a.m. That was
4
a
a.m.
killer.
on the way to work. What, brother? Go home. Have a rest. Why are you?
You can't. All right. He acknowledges the blame. He knows that he should have been driving slower, but that one was on the way to work. We had to, I think someone was coaching him. We had to be like, Wes, I'm sorry, we're running late because Bailey's got pulled over. There was that one. And then, so he knew he didn't have many points left. And then it was actually one day you were driving home from a Wednesday.
I had the morning off.
Had
the morning off. Finally had a Wednesday morning off. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go train in the 5 a.m. class anyway. I don't usually get to train with them. It's going to be fun. I trained in the class. And then I had nowhere to be. I just like finished, spoke to the guys, was driving home. No music, no phone, no nothing. Not rushing anywhere to be. Just driving home. And we live like 7 minutes from the gym. And I get pulled over going home, going like whatever, 10 or 15 over. Just like not even trying to go fast.
Just zoned out.
I was so off it.
Okay. And that was the point that we realized that the points were going to run out of their bandwidth.
Yeah.
So from that point, it's funny that we knew that the letter was coming to suspend his license, but for a long time, it didn't come. And we were refreshing like the app that shows you how many demerit points you have. And then we refreshed it one day, and all of his points had reset to 0. And I was like, oh my gosh, they must have made an error, or they must have seen your profile and thought that you were such a good boy so they wouldn't take your license off you. So we kind of had this moment of celebrating. But then very shortly after,
fueled by Maddie, just
being
putting
an
some
optimist,
false
a
hope in the
complete
air.
optimist,
They've
glass
just
half
given
full.
you all of your points back with no suspension.
Anyway, then we got the dreaded letter that he was going to lose his license and there were 2 options. Lose it for 3 months, no driving, or you could elect for a good behaviour bond where for 12 months you could continue to drive, but if you got a fine during that period, the suspension would double and you would have to lose your license for 6 months. That's right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we discussed it, and the fear of potentially getting done an additional time and losing his license for the extra period just didn't seem worth it when you consider our lifestyle, in that we obviously work together. Our lives are so synced up that it would only take a few slight alterations for Bailey to have no license and for our life to continue fairly seamlessly. So we made that decision to opt for the 3-month suspension.
Yeah, it was a pretty easy decision. I felt like, I needed to learn my lesson, even though I still kind of feel like I was hard done by. But B, it also meant that, like, because I hadn't had any outrageous experiences of like losing points, it it could happen so easily by not stopping at a stop sign 100% or going 5 or 10 kilometers over again over the Christmas period if I'm in like an area I'm not sure. So like it just like the risk of potentially it happening again, even if I was trying to be as careful as possible, we just didn't really want to take that risk, especially if we could afford to just tick the 3 months off and get it over and done with.
So initially it was Bailey didn't want me to tell anyone, but unfortunately I have quite a big
I was
mouth.
embarrassed. I'm a good boy. I'm a goody two-shoes. We spoke about it in the first podcast, who was Bailey O'Brien. I was SRC from like kindergarten all the way through to school
and
captain
you felt
year
like
12.
a criminal.
I never got a letter sent home. I never had a detention. I was like such a goody two-shoes, and I was just so embarrassed that I lost my license. I felt like a dead shit. Anyway, so lost his license. I told a few people it was leaked out of the circle. Yeah, I told Maddie we're not telling anyone. Like, no one's really going to know. We come to the gym most of the time anyway. Like, we can 100% get away with this. And Maddie just, like, loved this bit of power. She's hung it over my head and just told everyone she got the chance to.
So funny. Anyway, so what was it like? So the first week did suck a little bit because it was like a very big adjustment of us going, oh my gosh, how are we going to make this work? So the decision was in the mornings when Bailey coached, I would just come and train in the class. And then other periods, he would either run home because it's pretty much a 5K on the dot loop home. So he could either run it, or later on he looked at getting a bike to do trips to and from work. But that first week, it was an adjustment period. Also because as much as we see each other all the time, like we were seeing each other all the time, and it was like almost partner overload to a degree. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. But once we got through that first week, there definitely were some learnings. There's some more funny stories about when you got your first bike. He looked at getting an electric bike.
Yeah, I borrowed an electric bike. So initially I started just by running whenever I couldn't get a lift with Maddie. So in the mornings at 5 a.m. I would come with Maddie. She would train, I would coach. But when I come back in the afternoons, I would just like run back to work and then either get a lift home with her or I'd run back home. But that run, like even though it's only 5Ks, it would take a substantial amount of time.
And sometimes it would rain.
Sometimes it would rain. And so then I was like, I just want to have a bike to have the option, something a little bit quicker as well.
And you were getting, sorry, I would say one more funny thing. You were getting Ubers to the gym, but he was getting the Ubers to drop him like not near the gym, so he would walk in so that people wouldn't see him getting an Uber dropping him to the gym. It was so
I don't even want
funny.
to do this podcast, but you are just cutting me off and adding little bits.
It was a funny 3 months. All right, continue.
I don't even know where I was. But anyway, I borrowed an electric bike off my parents who had one in Wollongong. And so I used that for a little bit, but it was like, although it was good to kind of, because we live in like a very hilly area, so there's lots of hills to and from work. When I rode a normal bike, I would just get like hot and sweaty, which is fine. But like if I'm not actually trying to do it for fitness, it's kind of inconvenient. So I would just kind of cruise on the e-bike, but then as soon as I would go over like a bump or a driveway, the chain came off like 2 or 3 times. And I was just like, oh, fuck this. I'm the guy changing my chain on the side of the road. Just such an ick, man. Anyway, and then...
But I guess that sparked, because then you got your cycling bike. And this is what the endurance era has really been carried through, this loss of license. It's lined up quite well.
Yeah. So I'd started running before I lost my license. I decided I signed up to do a half marathon. So I was in my kind of like running era, I guess you could say. Anyway, doing more endurance, stepping away from CrossFit a little bit. And then it just happened to line up that I now needed to run more frequently. So yeah, it wasn't a bad time, but this losing of the license has definitely sparked the need to cycle more, which has then sparked the signing up of my first triathlon, actually.
Yeah, that's exciting. So those are some of the negatives. And again, like we say initially, like Bailey was a little embarrassed of having lost it. But anyone who follows on Instagram would know that he leaned more and more into this endurance side of things.
People can't make fun of me if I make fun of myself.
Fun of himself. So now we come, I guess, into some of the positives from the experiences where we want to really like unwrap like some of the lessons we've taken away. And I think to start off, I feel like both of us are coming off probably the best 3 months of a working period for us ever. We've gotten so much done in the last 3 months, and we've had such a good mindset towards work. Like our productivity has just been through the roof because of some of these I guess, routine changes, mindset changes that are all linked back to this, I guess, decision to not have the license for the 3 months. So did you want to dive into, I guess, some of the lessons?
Yeah, I think we have been uber productive the past 3 months. The first catalyst for that was kind of pulling back from competing as a CrossFit athlete, so having more time already to be more focused on the business and being more of an entrepreneur and a businessman than just an athlete. So that was the first catalyst. And then obviously I kind of stepping back from the high intensity CrossFit training, I wanted to do something a bit different. I wanted to start running a bit more, signed up for my first half marathon, did the marathon inside of that block as well. So I was doing much more endurance training. I was enjoying the change of pace. Instead of high intensity, it's more lower intensity and longer duration. So I was already really kind of like starting to change a few things. And then by losing the license and having to do more commuting either via running or via biking, it just gave me some more time just on my own, in my own thoughts, which it was just new. And if you think about the nature of CrossFit, it's high intense, or if I'm doing strength training, I'm trying to I've got music on, I'm trying to fire myself up so I can truly perform at the highest level or do whatever the task is for that day or that session. But when I'm doing my running training or I'm riding, they would often be aerobic based sessions where I have to keep my heart rate in a certain zone, so I can only push so hard, because if I go over that threshold, I'm no longer getting the aerobic benefits that I'm trying to target. So I kind of have to do that slower pace for that period of time, and so I kind of was just able to allow myself to do longer duration stuff at a lower intensity. And because I wasn't using my brain or my willpower to try and push myself to my limits, I really just was able to spend more time in my thoughts and think about different things, or listen to podcasts or audiobooks, or often just listen to nothing, and just be with my own thoughts, which is just something that was completely foreign and new, but just gave me a sense of clarity, which I don't know if I've almost had in the last 4 or 5 years. And there's this quote from a running coach that people often say, "Oh, I run to clear my head," but he disagrees with that, because clearing your head is emptying it, but you run for clarity and to have more clarity within your thoughts. And I think that nails it perfectly, and it doesn't just apply to running, but the biking, the running, the swimming now as well. More of this time in my own head has allowed my thoughts to kind of become more clear, and then allow me to be more purposeful in my thinking.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better than this is definitely the clearest version of you. And obviously it's been a bit of a great alignment of a couple things happening, but not only stopping the as much high intensity CrossFit training, which when you were doing that, it was thinking about training all day, every day. That was the main thing that you were thinking about. Even when you weren't training, it was what were you going to hit later in the afternoon? How was what you were eating going to affect that? All those different types of things. But then being able to step back and still train within our basic classes, but obviously that type of training doesn't require you to have as much brain thought, because you're just able to be coached and do the training versus having to sort of self-regulate yourself. But that endurance side, being able to just, I don't know, you just seem so calm and relaxed, and it gave you so much purpose and vision forward. And I guess from my perspective, how this affected my routine was that, like I said, I decided to come with Bailey every morning at 5 a.m. So he would coach the class and I would train in the class, which I've always, I guess, had the option to do. But I guess when you're running your own business, I do have a degree of flexibility in when I train, and that sometimes I might decide to come in and just go straight to work rather than training in that 5 a.m. class. But I decided to train at 5 a.m. every day, which then catapulted a really productive day for me. Because that training time for me is what I say is my me time, in that I'm able to focus just on myself. And when I do that at 5 a.m., I'm able to wholeheartedly be in that moment. But often prior to this, I might delay that until later in the day, or try and do a lunchtime session or a night session. And during those times, it was never with as much intention and I guess a degree of even myself quietness during a session, because my brain had been ticking, thinking about work all day. Then I was trying to cram in a training session knowing that I had more to do afterwards, and it was just chaotic. But forcing myself to train at 5 a.m. meant that I ticked that off. That was the first box of my day. And we spoke in our podcast last week about being disciplined and that we wake up and we make our bed and it's a tick. And for me, training first thing is a tick, and that no matter what happens during my day, I have trained. And I can be proud of that day because I've done something for myself. And I often talk with Bailey about if I'm in a bad headspace, you look at my routine and in the day I don't do a lot for myself. But as long as I've trained first thing, I can always say that even if shit goes wrong, I've ticked off that box for me. So I think that routine adjustment meant that I always did something for myself, and then I was habit stacking afterwards, in that I would go for a walk afterwards, I might even meditate, I'll journal, and that stacking of habits meant my day started in such a positive way, and then I rolled into my working day and I just really got a lot more done, and I feel like my headspace during the day has been so much better. So I definitely want to carry forward training at 5 a.m. I'm in a bit of a shift of routine at the moment that some of my nights are a little bit later due to some other training sessions. So if I train at 6 a.m., it's not going to matter. But as long as I'm disciplined in ensuring that I don't let myself think, oh, I'm just going to squeeze in a session later in the day, I feel like I have to make sure that the first thing I do is move my body.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I know that's once I've done one session, it's almost like you can kind of relax and then fully immerse yourself into whatever task you're doing after that, because you have trained, you've released those endorphins, you do feel better about yourself, and then almost then inspires you, oh, I might be able to train again later today or do something extra, and you feel like you kind of like have a bonus there instead of getting to the end of the day like, oh, I still haven't trained yet, I know I really should. It's very much a different mindset to ticking it off first thing in the morning. I struggle to train first thing in the morning, but I think such a key secret or aspect to being successful in life is waking up early. So I will always wake up early, and I will work as my form of productivity, or making sure I'm up and doing something and holding myself accountable. And I will always do that because I want to get up and make the most of the day and have more hours in the day than other people. But I've, especially in the past for CrossFit, my body just doesn't want to function as efficiently and productively in terms of like lifting heavy weights or really pushing to my limits at 5 a.m. in the morning. So I would do that like during the middle of the day, and then at night when it suits me a bit better. But now that I'm in more of an endurance phase, it does provide me a bit more flexibility with that. But coming back to starting the day by being productive, and the first thing you do kind of being for yourself and feeling like you're building momentum from the very first task, I think is something that's super underrated, and that if you're not already waking up early, it's something you should explore because it compounds over a lifetime.
Yeah, and I think hindsight's such a great thing. So that 3 months, I woke up at 5 a.m. and trained our 5 a.m. Bayfit class every day. This last week is the first week that Bailey and I haven't had to come to work together. And there's been a couple mornings where I've missed my morning session, and I can't believe how just different a headspace I've been in this week. I have been like a little bit under the weather, but I know that I need to make sure that that's a priority, because I've had this 3 month of learning, and I don't have the thing forcing me, having to take Bailey to work, to be a reason to not go at 5. I have to have the self-discipline of caring for myself enough to put me first. And that is what we say, like, discipline is just loving yourself, really.
Yeah.
So from next week, I'm back on my 5 a.m. grind.
Yeah, I think on that, for me, my discipline is that I know that people are relying on me. Like, I have to open up that gym, I have to run that class, or they don't get to train. So that's my discipline, is kind of like attached to like I don't want to say like accountability partner. It's literally just my job. But for someone like Maddie, not that I was helping her by losing my license, but she kind of had to have that accountability. So if someone else wants to wake up early but is struggling to find the discipline, then finding a partner or having someone who you're going to do it with that's going to hold you accountable is such a good way to kind of get that ball rolling until it becomes hopefully a part of your routine or a habit.
So those are a few lessons about routine, and I guess the value that Bailey especially has learned from having more moments of silence during his training. And I think a big key word that Bailey spoke about a lot, and I've had a lot of reflection, is the word solitude. Do you want to define how you would say what solitude is?
Yeah, I don't have a definition in front of me, but I would just define it as like your ability to be on your own or within your own thoughts, and how you kind of handle that concept.
Yeah, and it's just the power of silence. And these 3 months have had a lot of reflection, because obviously Bailey can touch more on how he's applied that solitude. But I guess from my perspective, as someone who is quite highly stressed, I find that if I'm ever in a bad headspace, I'll watch a TV show. And that's my cue that something is not okay, because I'm escaping and detaching from my reality by filling it with external noise that's in another world. So I'm trying to get away from my thoughts and into a world of someone else's. That's something that I've ebbed and flowed in and out of. And that even means when I'm working, often I would listen to a podcast because I needed something to fill my head to distract me from potential stress. When I was training, it's music. Anytime, I often fill my head with noise. And this idea of solitude is that you should spend more time in silence to quiet those thoughts. Bailey, do you want to touch on how this is sort of came into your realm?
Yeah, so I've kind of touched on it already. That's because I wasn't trying to run, especially as the initial catalyst, at an intensity that, like most of my running, and again, we can maybe talk about this in a different podcast, lessons I've learned since starting more endurance training. Most of my runs are aerobic runs, so in like a zone 3 pace where I can't let my heart rate go above 154 beats per minute. And so for me to run at that steady state pace, I have to just basically cruise. And then I'm not trying to listen to high tempo music to try and like G me up to hold on and keep going. And so instead, I am listening to podcasts, audiobooks, and I'm learning and being creative. And sometimes I would try and often I would say Mondays, I don't listen to anything. Tuesdays, I would listen to like an audiobook or something. Then if I did a speed session on a Wednesday or a Thursday, that's when I would like give myself music. And I kind of just made this little routine to have a mix of a few different modalities. So I was self-developing, but also having time in my own thoughts, and just kind of became this little routine that, I was starting to find was giving a lot back to me. And so I started doing it more and more. And that concept of, being in solitude with myself, I touched on it before, has just given me a level of clarity that has allowed all the noise, all the different ideas I have going on inside my head and allowed them to become a bit more clear and give me some direction of where to go and what I want to do. And I can't believe how many times I've either sent Maddie a voice message and said, "Hey Siri, message Madison Hare," and sent her something that just kind of came to me. We should do this, or let's do this next. Let's start a podcast, like whatever it is, like in that moment. It's just been eye-opening and just made me realize it's something I've been missing and I need to do more of. And I think it's something that if you feel like you struggle with that as well, that maybe you should do a bit more of that as well.
Because it is challenging. And I think that's been the main thing that for myself, because Bailey would speak about how much value he was getting out of it, and I could see that he was presenting these ideas to me. And it's like we say, we've had such a productive few months because these ideas were coming and I was like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. Like, rather than just being in the rat race of following our routine and doing the same thing over and over, rinse and repeat, he was having these moments of clarity which produced new and exciting thoughts that were out of the usual scope of what we were talking about. So then he challenged me to try and have these moments of solitude. And initially I found it really challenging. Like, I've had to really work hard at sitting in silence. But I feel like in these last 3 months, I've gotten so much better at it, and my headspace has improved so much. He challenged me to go on a run without music or headphones, and I honestly couldn't do it the first time. Like, it almost provoked anxiety within myself to be sitting in that silence, which was confronting, and it made me realize I need to sit in this more, because if I'm relying so heavily on distraction to get through to day, like, something is wrong. And the growth that has now come from doing a bit more inner work, reflecting on my thoughts and realizing where my brain pivots to and how do I guess be okay with that and potentially work through some more like rational thinking with those stressful thoughts. It has been so good. But I didn't just jump into being a
This is not a David
master.
Goggins podcast being like, stay hard, just like it's a skill, and it's sometimes you might not even be aware that I wasn't aware that I was lacking it. I knew that I was like fit, I was healthy, I had good relationships. Like, it wasn't something that it was clear to me until I started just doing it. And like I said, this losing the license was one of the catalysts that made me stumble kind of upon this. But it's now something that is such a strong part of our day-to-day, and something that we feel like we should share, because I feel like there's lots of value for plenty of people out there.
Yeah, and I think for me, like reflecting on it, like a lot of it has been built up habits from the past years and years and years of having my phone at such easy access. So some of the things that I did to try and make myself more comfortable with this was ensuring I don't use my phone within the first 2 waking hours of the day. And like, it's obviously difficult when you have an alarm, but once the alarm goes off, I would put my phone in my bag, train in the class at 5 a.m. And then I'd often been awake for at least 2 hours before I would then open up the world of communication and distraction. And I think that set my brain up, and I've heard this a lot on other podcasts, that it sets up a different like rewiring of chemistry of your brain not to need your phone all day, because otherwise you're just constantly getting notified by it and reminded to get on it. So that was one thing. And then in terms of like the actually having time without your phone, I honestly started by just going for a walk, and I wouldn't take my phone with me to see how I went. And that was great, because if I had it in my pocket, it was like an easy distraction to put something in my ears. So going for a walk with no phone, and I built up to like a run with no phone. But I've also unsubscribed from so much content and really reframed, I guess, what I am consuming. That includes like I've deleted like a lot of the like Netflix, Stan, those types of apps from my phone, so that they're not something that I go to straight away. And if I'm watching a show, I try and watch it on our TV at home, so it's actually like a downtime. In terms of podcasts, I've really resubscribed to things that aren't just talking gossip. I feel like a lot of girls would probably relate to like the gossip podcasts. And yes, they give like a quick, easy laugh, but for me, like, it was just not healthy content to be consuming when I guess I'm trying to go on a personal development journey. So resubscribing to content that actually inspired good, productive thoughts, that's been a huge change for me. And I feel like you would agree that it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, I feel like there is so much noise and information out there, and you do have to be very selective in what you take in, because there's so much that it can become overwhelming, and you have to be careful in who you allow to influence your thoughts. So yeah, I think I also, like, even like last week, did another big unfollow call on my Instagram, and it's not like an ego thing. It's just I'm making sure that the people I'm following are people I either see on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, or like people I'm inspired by. And so I might not know them, but I look up to them. I want to learn from them. And if there's people outside who aren't really ticking either of those boxes, then like I don't really care what they're doing, and it's not in a savage way, but just also I prefer not to fill my brain with anything like that. So yeah, that's one thing that we've kind of really been more careful. So having more time in solitude, so we are more time to have clarity in our thoughts, as well as then limiting the amount of noise, the amount of information from other people.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you can only take so much information in. And I think that's what we're saying. We just want to be more selective with what we do take in. And even for me, it's been a huge thing of like, I used to be such a huge consumer of all of like the CrossFit gossip. And there's some really gossipy, negative channels that talk about CrossFit information. And as someone who's such passionate about the sport, I've had to be careful of like, oh, but they're just talking so negatively and complaining about things all the time. I want to detach from that, because you just repeat, I guess, what you're hearing all of the time. So that adjustment in terms of what I've been consuming has allowed that when I have these moments of solitude, I feel a lot calmer within that space.
So I guess to wrap everything up, you don't have to lose your license to learn this lesson and to find solitude and clarity, but it could be fun. Or you could just keep your license and explore.
If you have a partner that you work with, it's probably fun.
Yeah.
If you don't, I've heard some horror stories.
Yeah, probably not convenient. But there's definitely plenty of lessons to take away from this experience. And things that I feel like our audience can like apply to their day-to-day from the very start of the day, like minimizing how much contact you have with your phone. Set a time limit on it. Maddie said 2 hours. For me, I don't go on social media until probably like 8 a.m. If I wake up, I will check my messages, because just in case a coach is cancelled or they can't come in or there's something urgent. So my messages I will check purely for comms, but no form of social media or scrolling anything until like I've been up for at least 3 hours. And then often my communications are on social media after that. And then same, vice versa, before you go to bed, try and like limit when you turn your phone off a good hour beforehand, just so you allow your brain to kind of wind down and have some time ready to sleep before that. And then during the day, not sure when you train, whether it be morning, middle of the day, or at night, but maybe experimenting doing some without headphones, or going for those longer endurance kind of pieces: running, swimming, biking, and listening to a podcast or doing it on your own to try and explore that. I think, like Maddie said, initially it's not easy. It's not something that we are wired to do. We are just filled with so many distractions on a day-to-day. But I think it's healthy to try and explore some more time in your own thoughts and be okay with that.
Yeah. And the one which I wrote down as like a great way to try if you find it too difficult is to go for a swim. Not that I do go for a swim, but obviously when you do, unless you have some very special headphones, you are in complete solitude. And that could be a great place to start because you're forced to be in silence, and then you can add it into your walks, runs, whatever it may be. But it's just about giving your brain, I guess, more time to settle, be calm, and think through those decisions which you may be distracting yourself from. As someone who, like, distraction is my main form of coping, it's been really good to actually sit in some of the uncomfortableness and work through it. So I look back on the last 3 months, there has been lots of funny moments, some frustrating ones too. But the routine that I've gained from it, as well as learning through Bailey and his experience about having more time, I guess, in your own thoughts, has been so beneficial, and I cannot wait to carry those lessons forward. So we hope you've enjoyed reminiscing on us on an interesting 3-month period, but lots of lessons that have come from it. Again, you don't have to lose your license to learn this lesson. Apply it to yourself, see if you can get any benefit from us, and touch base with us about how you have found finding more moments of solitude. Our final reminder, don't speed, drive safely, look after others on the roads, and be all in.
I have all of my demerit points back. If anyone wants to race, let's go.
All right, be all in. Bye.